Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Amin Sugiarto, and I will presenting my research proposal entitled Analysis of Informal English Language Acquisition Among Street Vendors in Kota Mandalika, Lombok. And without any further, let's start with the background of the study. English has become a global lingua franca that particularly in the tourism sectors where it functions as the main communication between people from different background and then cultural background. In tourism destinations such as Kota Mandalika, English is essential for facilitate the transaction, providing service, and then maintaining interaction between local communities and international visitors. As a result, individuals who are directly involved in tourism's activities are required to use English of their regardless of their educational backgrounds. And then in Kota Manalika, street vendors interact with foreign tourists on daily life as a part of their economics activities. This interaction include greeting the tourists, offering the service, and then negotiate the price, responding to the question. Through these activities, English has become a practical communication tools rather than academic subject. However, most of these street vendors have limited access to formal education or structures language training. Um, they do not learn English through the classroom, like reading the textbook or explicit grammar instruction. And then, despite this limitation, street vendors are still able to communicate effectively in English. This condition indicates the presence of informal English language acquisition, where language develops naturally through the meaningful interaction and communicative necessity. And English is acquired subconsciously as vendors focus on convey the meaning and achieving the transactional goals rather than on grammatical correctly. And this phenomenon highlights as the important as research urgency and particularly in Indonesian in tourism sectors. While previous studies have examined English use in tourism's, fewer studies have focused on the process of the informal English language acquisition among the informal workers, such as street vendors. Therefore, investigating how English is acquired, processed, and then used by street vendors in Kota Mandalika is necessary to deepen the understanding of second language acquisition in natural and non-formal setting and to provide the empirical evidence from the local Indonesian, especially in tourism destination. The next is about research problems. The first one is street vendors in Kota Mandalika acquire English informally through the daily interaction with international tourists. Yet, the source and process of this acquisition have not been truly examined. The second problem is the ways in which street vendors maintain communication despite limited English proficiency have not been sufficiently explored. And then third is there is limited research that integrates language acquisition theory with real-life tourism communication among informal workers. Next is research question. The first one is what are the source of informal English language acquisition among street vendors in Kota Mandalika, Lombok? The second one is how do street vendors acquire English informally through the daily interaction with international tourists? The last one is what communicative strategies do street vendors use to maintain effective communication in tourism interaction? And res- for the research objective is to, in line with the research question, is to identify the source of informal English language acquisition among street vendors in Kota Mandalika, Lombok, to analyze the process of informal English language acquisition experienced by street vendors. Last one is to describe the communicative strategies used by street vendors to achieve effective communication with international tourists. Okay, for the next slide is about literature review, the next point. And in the first literature review from Jumadil and Siswana 2023 that investigate the English language acquisition among street vendors in Mandalika Beach, Lombok. In this study found that vendors were able to acquire functional English expression through the daily interaction with foreign tourists, despite having a limited formal education. And then the acquisition process occur naturally through the uh, repeated exposure, imitation, and then communicative necessity. And then the findings indicates that English was acquired substantially and used primarily for transactional purpose rather than the academic accuracy. And then the next is from Tom Tong to 2023 that examine English use among local product vendors in tourism area in Thailand. In this study revealed that vendors relied on limited but functional English vocabulary and commonly use expression to communicate uh, with the international tourists rather than focusing on the grammar uh, correctness. The vendors priorities successful communicate through the repetition, simplification, and then memorization of frequently use of phrase. And this study supports the current research by demonstrating that informal tourists workers acquire English as the practical communication tools that align with the concept of language acquisition. And then the last research from the Widya Iswara, Lutfiyati and Nurman, 2024, explored that the relationship between second language acquisition theory and language English language teaching. And in this study, emphasized that the SLA theories, particularly those related to the naturalistic language exposure and interaction, are essential for understanding the language development outside formal classroom setting. In this study, argued that language acquisition can occur independently of formal interaction, and when the learners are exposed to uh, meaningful interaction. We move to the next slide. For this research, I use three three main major theory. The first one is input hypothesis from the uh, Krasn 1982, and in this theory explained that language acquisition occurs when learners are exposed to comprehensible input, which is language that they can understand even if contains elements slightly above their current level, or I plus one. And this level is commonly refers to, like I said, I plus one. And then according to the Carson, language acquisition is substantially process that develops naturally when learners focus on meaning rather than on grammatical rules. The second one is sociocultural theory. In this sociocultural theory developed by Vygotsky 1978, that emphasized that language development is functional, is a fundamentally social process. According to this theory, learning and development occur through the interaction with others and are immediate by social and cultural tools such as language, uh, gesture, and then the share practice. And then language acquisition does not happen in isolation, but through the even without a formal education. And in this social activities is not happen in isolation, but through the participation in the social activities, specific in cultural context. The last one is communicative competence. In this theory, originally proposed by Himes 1972, and then later developed by Connolly and Swin 1980, expand the concept of language ability beyond grammatical knowledge. And in this story argues that successful communication requires not only linguistic competence but also sociolinguistic um, discourse and then strategic competence. And for the strategic competence in particular refers to ability to communication strategies to overcome the language limitation. We move to the theoretical frameworks. As you can see at the top is informal language acquisition, um, which represent the central focus of this study. And this concept refers to the natural and subconscious development of English ability that occurs outside formal classroom instruction. Then in this study, English is acquired through the daily interaction and in tourism's environment rather than through the formal classroom. There are three focus in here. The first one is source of acquisition, and then process of acquisition, and the last one is communicative strategies. And the first component of this framework is source of acquisition, which explain where the English input come from. And this component is mainly supported by the theory Krasn input hypothesis. International tourists serve as the primary source of the comprehensible input as they use simple and context-based English when interact with vendors. And next is the second component is process of acquisition, which explain how English is acquired over time. And in this part of the framework is strongly supported by sociocultural theory through the repetition, trial and error, memorization, and then the contextual use. The vendors gradually internalize the English expression while participating in the social interaction with the international tourists. The last one is communicative strategies, which explain how communication is maintained despite the limited English proficiency. This component is grounded in the communicative competence theory, particularly strategic competence. The vendors use simplification, code switching, gesture, and then from like speech to overcome the the linguistic limitation or the language limitation. And the last from all the components, source, process, and then communicative strategies, um, uh, it lead to the outcome of this framework. And at the bottom, you can see the framework, the effective intercultural communication or functional English use. This outcome does not imply native like the fluency or grammatical accuracy. Instead, it refers to the vendor's ability to communicate effectively with the international tourists to achieve the practical goals such as they selling their products, selling the service, provide the information, and then maintain the positive interaction. Let's move on to the next topics. It's about research method. The first for this research is using qualitative case study, which means the focus is on the understanding the people's real experience in detail, not on the numbers or statistics data. And then for the participant, it's around 10 to 12 street vendors in Kota Mandalika will be chosen through the purposive sampling. And then for the setting, the research take place in Kota Mandalika Lombok. The next is instruments. For this instrument, I use the interview guide is the open-ended question to ask the vendors about how they learn, how they acquire and use English. And then I use audio recorder to record the vendor's answer of the interview, and then observation checklist to note the behaviors like the use of expression, gesture, repetition, or switching language. And then I use field notes to write down the context or impression and the things that not captured by the audio. The next is the data analysis. We'll use the thematic analysis. The first one is familiarization is reading the transcript and notes carefully before I do the interview, and then use coding to marking the important ideas like learning language by listening, and then the using of gesture or expression. And next is theme development by grouping the codes into the big themes like as learning strategies or communication problem. And then last is reviewing and then interpreting by checking the themes and explaining them in relation in research question. And then last is the trustworthy. The first one is member checking by asking the vendors to review and confirms the research summaries or the interview summaries of their answer to make sure their views are represented correctly. And then triangulation applied by comparing the information from different sources such as interviews and observation and field notes. No, so the findings are not based on just one method. The last one is detailed records to keep detailed records of every step in the process, which help to maintain the accuracy and reliability through the research in this research. I think that's all from my presentation of my research proposal. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.